Hello, my name is Ebenezer from Bandapa IELTS. In today's lesson, we look at how to write a letter of apology. Letters of apology are common types of IELTS letters, and this lesson will show you step by step how to write them. Here is what we'll be covering in the lessons. We will look at the question structure. We will look at the letter structure. We will look at the letter, whether it should be written in a formal or an informal format. And we will look at the greeting, that is the start point of the essay, of the letter, and look at the sign off, how to sign it off. And finally, we will check how to generate ideas and then write sample letters. Now, the question structure. All questions of IELTS letters have same structure. They are made up of 3 parts. So if you look at the question, you would see 3 different parts. You have the first part, which has the topic itself. Okay, so the topic of the question will be given to you. And the second part will be the person you are going to write to. And the third part will be what you should write about. Okay, so it has been listed as 3 different bullet points. So you have a topic, then you have who you're going to write to, then you have the bullet points stating what you should write about. Let's look at a sample question for a letter of apology with 3 parts illustration. So this is the sample question. Your neighbor has written to you complaining the noise from your flat. Write a letter to your neighbor, and in this letter, explain the reason for the noise. Offer your neighbor an apology and tell them what action you will take. So with the illustration of the question part or the question structure, we can see that the blue one shows the topic. The red part shows who you're going to write to, and this time it is your neighbor. And the third part shows what you should write about. In these 3 bullet points, we are told to write the reason for the noise. Okay, and also we should offer our neighbor an apology, and we should tell them what action to take. If you're able to understand the question properly through this analysis, it will help you in your planning. If you want to know the in-depth knowledge of how to plan, I've already done it in one of the lessons, so you can check through how to plan IELTS letters and you'll be able to get a full in-depth knowledge on how to plan a letter. Now let's look at how to structure this particular letter. Okay, so we look at the layout of the IELTS letter when it comes to apology. The layout of IELTS letters should follow the structure of the question and consist of 4 paragraphs with a greeting at the beginning and a sign off at the end. Okay, so we are going to use this essay to remember the 6 parts that we're going to use for our structure. The first part, you just start with a greeting. For instance, if you're going to write any letter, you need to greet the person. So how do you greet? So you start with dear, and then you continue with the person, whoever it is. If you know the name, you can do. If you don't know, then there is a way to go about it. So dear, and then you write. The first paragraph should be the purpose of your writing. Okay, so you need to start with the reason why you are writing that particular letter. Then the second paragraph will now answer the first bullet point. So if you remember, we stated that you have 3 bullet points. So the first paragraph and the second paragraph will now write about the first bullet point. the third paragraph will write about the second bullet point, and then the fourth paragraph will write about the third bullet point. Then you sign off. Okay, so this is like our day-to-day letters that we write when we were in our secondary schools and primary schools. Okay, so you start with dear, whether dear sir, dear madam, whoever you're writing to, depend on the letter, but it's a letter of apology. So first paragraph, you start with why you are writing, and then second paragraph, you now bring the details of your tests. So this one, they've given you 3 bullet points of what you should write about. So the first one will hold the first bullet point, third paragraph will hold the second bullet point, and the fourth paragraph will hold the third bullet point. All you need to do is to create your plan. That means that you're going to add in the details from the question, and then you are done. Okay, so let's look at the question and let's look at the details that we can write into it. So your neighbor has written to you complaining about the noise from your flat, and you have to write a letter to your neighbor, and in the letter you should explain the reason for your noise, offer the neighbor an apology, and tell them what action you will take. So if we are going to add the details from the question into our plan or our structure, then this is how it should look like. We will salute the neighbor by writing dear and then who the neighbor is, whether we know the name or we don't. So dear neighbor, right? And the first paragraph will be the reason why we are writing the letter. That is to apologize for the noise, right? So we are going to apologize for the noise. That is the reason why we are writing the letter. And in our second paragraph, we are going to explain the reason for the noise, right? That is for the first bullet point, because we said that the second paragraph will now tell the examiner or would deal with the first bullet point. So the first bullet point is about explaining the reason for the noise. So we are going to explain the reason for the noise. And then paragraph 3 will now offer the neighbor an apology, right? And then paragraph 4, we will tell them what action we have taken or we will take. So the question said, tell them the action you will take. So you should tell them the action that you will take. So this will be how your letter will look like. Now, letters must be written in an appropriate tone and style. So we need to look at whether our essay will be a formal letter or an informal letter. One thing you should note is that when it comes to general letters or general writing, okay, in this IELTS general writing, when it comes to these letters, the difference between the academic and the general with this part 1 is that you need to deal with the tone. You have to study the tone of the question. Okay, so it must be written in an appropriate tone and style. Okay, the reason is that, just take it for instance, you are writing a letter to your friend, okay, and you begin to write in a formal way, like you are writing to your boss. How do you feel that your friend will react? Okay, trying to call him names which are formal, or trying to speak in a very formal way to your friend, how do you feel that he will react? Or take it for instance, you are writing a letter to your boss, but the way you are writing the letter, it seems like you are actually addressing a friend. So how do you think your friend or your boss will feel when he sees that particular letter? That is one of the differences between academic and general tests. So in the IELTS letters, you must write in an appropriate tone when it comes to that, and there are 2 different options. You have to write either in a formal way or an informal way. Okay, so it can be a formal letter or an informal letter. for you to write in a formal letter, it has to be to someone you don't know or you don't know well. Okay? If you are writing to somebody whom you don't know or you do not know that much, then you are going to write in a formal letter or in a formal format. But if you are writing to a friend, someone who is a friend, then it has to be addressed in an informal tone. It's very important that you are able to identify what type of question you are required to write. And for you to do that, you have to follow these rules. If the question includes the word friend, then use informal language. Just take note of that. If the question include the word friend, then use informal language. But if it does not include the word friend, then use formal language. It's as simple as that. If the question include friend, use informal. If there is no word like friend, use a formal language. Okay. The only exception is if the letter is to a close family member. Okay. When you have to write to a close family member, like an uncle or an aunt, your grandfather, grandmother, okay, then you can also use an informal tone. All right. Mostly in our primary and JHS, we call something semi-formal. You get it? But you can choose to write it in an informal tone. One situation can be very confusing. Okay, when you are writing to a neighbor like this one, okay, if you are writing to a neighbor, then you have to assume that you don't know them very well. So you keep the letter formal. Okay, so if you are writing to a friend, make it informal. If you are writing to somebody you don't know, write it in a formal tone. If you are writing to a relative, a close relative, write it in an informal tone. But if you are writing to a neighbor, assume that you don't know the neighbor. So write it in a formal tone. For that reason, it will help us or lead us to the opening of our letter. So with this sample letter, since you're going to write it to a neighbor, we have to assume that we don't know this neighbor. So we are going to write a formal letter. So how do we write a formal letter? How do we start a formal letter? Let's look at the greeting and the sign off. We will start with how you will greet, okay, in this kind of letter, and how you sign off when you are finished with your actual letter. So in the greeting, it's more likely that you know the name of your neighbor, maybe just a close neighbor. So you might know the name of your neighbor. Okay, so if you know the name of your neighbor, you can write the name like Miss Jones. You can make it up if you want to. Like for instance, this one, we have your neighbor. I can choose to just make it up like dear Miss Jones. Okay, right? So I can just write it there. And if you don't know the neighbor, maybe you don't know the neighbor, you can just write dear sir or madam. Okay, so that is the greetings. Take note, if you know the neighbor, you can write the name of the neighbor. But remember, you can still make it up. You can still make up a name and write the name there. If you don't know the neighbor, you just write dear sir or madam. Now, after you have finished writing your letter, you need to sign off. All right. Maybe we are using yours sincerely, yours faithfully, dependent. If the name is known, right? Maybe you wrote dear Miss Dixon, or let me just maintain the name again, Jones, right? Maybe you wrote dear Miss Jones, right? You wrote dear Miss Jones. That means that you know the name of the person. Sign off by writing yours sincerely. Yours sincerely. And if you don't know the person, if the name is not known, sign off by writing yours faithfully. Yours faithfully. All right. You can also use a word like kind regards. Kind regards. It is a formal but friendly way. Okay, and it's appropriate for most situations. So you can use something like kind regards. It's particularly useful if you are struggling to remember how to spell the word, maybe sincerely or faithfully. You can just write regards, but make sure that you have been able to use up these things so that you get used to it. So kind regards, you can use them, especially if you cannot remember how to spell faithfully and sincerely. But you can use kind regards in most of these situations. But remember, if you know the name, use sincerely. If you don't know the name, use faithfully. It's very important that you sign off a formal letter with a full name. So if you sign off the letter, maybe you wrote yours sincerely, make sure that you write your full name beneath so that you be able to get everything correctly. Let's see how to write it. Take note, if you are, as I stated, if you are signing off a formal letter, so this is a formal letter. If you are signing off a formal letter, after you have written your sign off word like yours sincerely, you write a full name. So this one I use Gifty Bedu. So yours sincerely, Gifty Bedu. Okay, you write a full name. But when it's informal, then you can choose to you are not supposed to write a full name. Okay, so for informal letters, which is to your friend, you can use one of the phrases that I'm going to just mention right now. So in the informal letter, you can just sign off using these phrases like all the best, see you soon, keep in touch. All right, there are several of them, but you can choose to use these. Example, you can just say keep in touch, but make sure that you don't use a full name. Use a single name, one name. Okay, so keep in touch Benny, keep in touch Jones. Okay, so your name, but you can just cut it short. You can use any, keep it informal. That's what the tone has to be. So remember that for this particular sample essay, it is a formal letter that we are writing. So let me say we are going to use a formal letter, and we are going to make sure that we know the name of the person. So since we know the name of the person, hold on. So since we know the person in this letter, so I'm going to write, or we are going to write a formal letter for this one. Take note, it's a formal letter. And since it's a formal letter, we will start with dear. So we assume that we know the person who is our neighbor. So you're going to just address her as Miss Jones. So dear Miss Jones, that's how we will start it. And then after writing our essay, we will end, or we will sign off by writing yours sincerely, since we know the name. And then we will write our full name, and this year the name will be Gifty Bedu. So that's all that we need, and that we will just put in the details in the middle of them, and then we will be done. Now that we are ready to think, now that we are ready, what we do is that we'll be thinking about some of the ideas that we are going to write about. Okay, take note that we have 3 bullet points here, and this will be our guidelines to help us so that we'll be able to write them accordingly. So it's not difficult. You already know what you're going to write at each point in time. So in each paragraph, you take one of the bullet points and you write about it. So our first one will be, we are going to explain the reason for the noise. Our second paragraph will offer our neighbor apology. And then the third paragraph will tell them what action we are going to take. So that's what we are going to do. So let's look at how we can generate the ideas for IELTS letters. Now, with only 150 words that you are going to write, you don't need to add too many ideas in each of the bullet points. Just make sure that you write about each bullet point and develop each one of them fully. Okay, so the idea that you pick up, especially if you say you're going to explain the reason for the noise, make sure that you explain them fully. They don't have to be the best ideas that you can possibly think of. Okay, so go with the first thought that you have and don't waste too much time trying to think about the better trying to think about the best idea you can ever have. Okay, so don't waste too much time. Make sure that you have some ideas that directly relate to the bullet points. That's all that you need. So if we look at this question, we've written down some points under them, or some answers, sample answers that I'm going to use to develop or to write this letter. But it shouldn't be the only answer. You can also write down some of the reasons yourself. So you can pause the video and try to write down your own answers without looking at the one I've written. So what are you going to say for the reason? What are you going to explain? Okay, so when it comes to explaining the reason for the noise, what will you write? Why do you think there is a noise in your flat? And how would you offer your neighbor an apology? All right, so, and also you have to tell the neighbor what action you take. So what action will you take to also reduce the noise or to stop the noise? So these are some of the answers that we have provided for this letter. The reason for the noise is that we are having our flat rewired. Okay, so maybe we are going to rewire our flat, so that's why there is a noise in our flat. And then when it comes to the second one, where we say we're going to offer our neighbor an apology, we write that we are sorry for the noise and we feel that it has disturbed them. So this is how we are going to write it. And also when it comes to telling them what action we will take, we are going to ask the electrician to be as quiet as possible, and also we are going to pay for an additional electrician so that the job can finish sooner. This shouldn't be the only answer. You can get a lot of answers for this. Okay, so once we have this, then our plan is complete, right? Our plan is complete. What we need to do is to have a greeting, which will be the first part, and then we have we also have a sign off. Okay, so let's look at how our planning will look like. So this is how our complete plan for the letter will look like. Okay, so the letter states that we are going to write an apology letter to our neighbor who is complaining that there is a noise coming from our flat, and then we're going to explain the reason for the noise, offer our neighbor an apology, and tell them the action we will take. So in our first paragraph, in the first step, we are going to salute the person, and in this state we stated that we will assume that we know our neighbor. So we just write dear and then Miss Jones. And the first paragraph, we write the reason or the purpose for the letter. So the purpose is that we're going to apologize for the noise. And then our third paragraph, okay, our third step will be our second paragraph, where we will explain the reason for the noise. Okay, so that will be the first bullet point, and we stated that the reason for the noise is that we are having our flat rewired. In the third paragraph, we are going to offer our neighbor an apology, and then we will state that we are sorry for the noise and we are sorry that it has disturbed them, right? And finally, in our fourth paragraph, we are going to tell them what action we are going to take. And in this instant, we stated that we are going to ask the electrician to be quiet as possible and also pay for an additional one to help us finish the job very soon. And also after that, we will just sign off. So this is all that you'll be doing. And as you can see, because of the bullet point that's available for you, it makes this letter very simple for you to write. Just take note that the tone of the language is very important, so you have to keep it formal. Now that we have decided on our greeting, we decided on our sign off, so we have to start straightforward and write our paragraph 1. We're going to write the purpose for the letter, or the purpose of the letter. As I stated, we've already decided on the greeting. Okay, so we will start with the first paragraph. And in the first paragraph, we are going to write the purpose for the letter, or the purpose of the letter. So in this first paragraph, you state the reason for writing the letter, and that is the purpose. So we stated that our purpose is to apologize for the noise. You know, a lot of students make the mistake by missing the reason for the letter. Okay, and it's very important for you to do that in order to gain marks. You can just write it in just one simple sentence. You don't have to complicate it. Okay, so this is an example. So we are writing a letter of apology. So we just started by saying that I'm writing to apologize for all the noise coming from my flat over the past few days. Okay, you can write it in your own way, but make sure that you are stating the purpose of the letter. You don't have to use contractions in formal letter. You know, this is formal letter, so you don't have to write in contraction. For instance, if it's I am, don't write it I'm. Write like that. Don't write it this way, because if you write it this way, you'll be marked wrong. This will be wrong. Okay, so this I am, this I am will be marked wrong. You have to write it in a full word, I am. Okay, so I am writing to apologize for all the noise coming from my flat over the past few days. For maybe a letter of apology to a friend, okay, then you know that you are writing an informal letter, so you can choose to write, not choose to, but you must write in contractions. Okay, I am. So that is how you go about it. Now, after writing the purpose, we now move on to the second paragraph, which will be to answer our first bullet points, explaining the reason for the noise. So after writing the purpose, the second paragraph is to answer the first bullet point, which is to explain the reason for the noise. That is what our question is talking about. So in the second paragraph, we just write about the first bullet point. And remember that you have to keep the language formal, as we stated, because this is a formal writing. So keep the language formal for the question, and make sure that you have been able to write properly and express your idea clearly. Be precise. This is a detailed work, so be precise. So let's see what we could write. We could just write something like this for this answer. I am having the whole place rewired at the moment, as I was experiencing some electrical faults that could not be repaired. The old wiring had been in since the flat was built and needed replacing, so I had no choice but to undertake this necessary work. You can see that we use some formal tone like could instead of can. Okay, so words like should, could, would, they are formal tones. So instead of saying will, shall, you can use the word should instead of shall. You can use the word would instead of will, and you can use the word could instead of can. Okay, so these are tones that are very important for you to go through. Now let's go to the second question: how to write or how to offer our neighbor an apology, and that will be the third paragraph. So this will be our third paragraph where we are going to offer our neighbor an apology, and that is answer to the paragraph, to the bullet point 2. Okay, so let's go through a sample answer. I do appreciate that there has been a lot of banging going on during the day. I sincerely apologize for this and regret that you have been disturbed. I was hoping that most of the work would be done while you were out at work, right? Out at work. But I admit that it did continue into the evening the other day. So you can see that we are just explaining that we understand the problem of the neighbor, of our neighbor, and we are sincerely apologizing. Consider here we used a word like would, right? We used this word would instead of will, okay, to show that this is a formal letter and we are writing in a formal tone. Okay, so let's do this for the last one and then we'll have a complete letter. Paragraph 4. Our paragraph 4 will address the third bullet point. That's we are going to tell our neighbor the actions that we will take. And in our planning session, we stated that we are going to ask the electrician to be as quiet as possible and pay for additional electrician if possible, so that the job could finish sooner. So let's look at sample answer. To get the job finished as quickly as possible, I will employ, right, an additional electrician. Although there will be inevitably still be some noise, I will ask them to be as quiet as possible and be sure to finish by 5 p.m. when I believe you usually get home. So what we need to do now is just add the sign off to it, and then our essay will be complete. So let's look at the complete essay together. All right, so here is the finished letter. Let's read through. Remember, our question was about our neighbor, so let's read. Dear Miss Jones, I'm writing to apologize for all the noise coming from my flat over the past few days. I'm having the whole place rewired at the moment, as I was experiencing some electrical faults that could not be repaired. The old wiring had been in since the flat was built and needed replacing, so I had no choice but to undertake this necessary work. I do appreciate that there have been a lot of banging going on during the day. I sincerely apologize for this and regret that you have been disturbed. I was hoping that most of the work would be done while you were out at work, but I admit that it did continue into the evening the other day. To get the job finished as quickly as possible, I will employ an additional electrician, although there will inevitably still be some noise. I will ask them to be as quick as possible, as quiet as possible, and be sure to finish by 5 p.m. when I believe that you usually get home. Yours sincerely, Gifty Bedu. So you can see that we have a complete letter, and this letter is 183 words. So you don't need to add a lot of things into it. Just try to stay with the points and then explain it fully. That's all you need to do. All right, thank you, and we'll meet in our next lesson.